Hello everyone, Guillaume here, host of the E-Commerce Wizards podcast, where I feature leaders in business in e-commerce. Today's guest is Ciara Stockeland, the founder of the boutiqueworkshop.com. We're going to talk about personal stories and lesson learned running a product-based business. So she formerly built a 7-figure business with 13 locations around the US by creating a franchise model. 11 of those 13 locations were franchised with the women's apparel system, a company that was called Mode Iowa, and we sold that to one of the franchisees. So I think this will be an interesting experience to discuss this, and so that you don't need to learn yourself by having to fail and so on. So you can learn from somebody else's experience here. I believe we have lots of wealth of knowledge to share. Now, before we get started, we have a sponsorship message. This episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales, or to move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash reserves, or to automate business processes to gain efficiency and reduce human processing error for a company, MageMontreal can do that. We've been helping e-commerce stores for over a decade. Here's the catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. We do everything Magento related. If you know someone who needs a website, design, development, maintenance, training, support, debugging, we got their back. Email our team, support@MageMontreal.com, or go to MageMontreal.com. That's MAGE Montreal.com. All right, so Ciara, I'm happy to have you with me here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Can you give us a brief overview of your background so people know a bit more about it?
Yes. So I was born and raised in North Dakota, about 2 hours south of the Canadian border. So we spent a bit of time in Winnipeg for summer vacations. Third generation entrepreneur. My grandfather and father also owned small businesses. And so I was no stranger to the small business world. I started my first small business when I was 13. I was a homeschool student and started an acting company, which I built and grew for about a decade. And then when that wore out its welcome and I was ready to move on to the next venture, I decided to go into retail. So I opened my first retail store in 2006. My second concept, just 6 months later, I ended up merging those two concepts and built the brand Mode, which I, as you mentioned, then franchised. Ran that for about a decade. I ended up selling that brand to one of the franchisees, and then moved on to some other ventures, all product-based related. I'm now just coaching and consulting, working with inventory-based businesses, just really helping them build profitable businesses based on the knowledge of the numbers that they have in their business. So I love what I'm doing. A lot of experience, like you mentioned, a lot of wins, but a lot of losses too. And I really enjoy where I am now, decades later after the first venture.
Awesome. So I'm interested to go through the whole story here. So let's start at the beginning, actually. When you created this women's apparel business, like, how did you do, let's say, your product sourcing, your design? Did you create your own design? Did you sort of white label and resell something else? Like, how was the startup?
Yes, very interesting. So, I think often in business, we have one idea in mind when we start and we end up going a different direction. And that was no different from me. So when I decided to open my first store, I knew I needed to be different in order to build a brand. Small town, Fargo, North Dakota, there wasn't a lot of boutiques or retail opportunities. And so how could I create a niche or be a little different? So my first concept was a maternity baby store, very high end. We really started when, maternity clothes were really starting to come about in the fashion space. We did a lot of our buying in LA, the majority of our buying in LA. And so I had this high-end maternity baby store. It was beautiful boutique. And then my husband was working for a trucking company, and they would haul a lot of product for high-end department stores. And when product would become damaged or the packaging or it was misshipped, the trucking company had to pay the freight, the salvage freight. The business didn't want it back. The vendor didn't want it back. And so the trucking company would accumulate all this salvaged inventory. And so because I had a store, my husband's boss came to me and said, "Hey, Ciara, you already own a store. Would you be willing to sell a couple truckloads of all of this salvaged product for us?" And I love an opportunity. So I said, yes, I'm not going to put it in my maternity store, but there's another empty spot right next door to mine. And what if we just rented that out? We backed up the semis and I sold it for you. So we just did a handshake deal. We had no paper contract, which I think is amazing. He said, I'll pay.
Amazing in a
Amazing.
disaster. I would
Yeah.
never do
He's
that.
like, I will pay for I'll give you the product and I'll pay the rent if you pay the employees and you manage it, and we'll split everything 50-50. So he backed up his 2 truckloads. We unloaded amazing inventory, some of it quite strange, but a lot of it beautiful, wonderful inventory. And I opened my second concept, which we called Mode. So I had Mama Mia, which was my first maternity baby store. And right next to it, we had Mode, which was a designer outlet. And that took off. It was one of my first lessons in retail, that you have to pay attention to what your customer wants and what your customer demands versus what you have in your mind that your brand is going to look like. Because I loved Mama Mia. It was my beautiful child, but Mode made money and appealed to the masses. So we ended up combining those 2 concepts, bringing the Mode concept over into the boutique, and then really creating Mode, which we then franchised.
Okay, so your product sourcing was sort of spoon-fed to you. Say, here's 2 semi-truckload, and let's see what sells in this. And then they could keep providing you those products in the same way.
So no, actually, yes. So we had our first truckloads, and this was my second conundrum. We had these truckloads, the products sold wonderfully, and I ran out. And they had no more because it had taken them years to accumulate this freight. So now I had a concept that was in demand. Everybody wanted to come shop, and I had no inventory. I was running really low. So I had to figure out, where am I going to get this off-price overstock inventory to keep this supply, keep filling this supply for the customers. So I began cold calling. First of all, I went to the vendors that I had in maternity. Do you have any overstocks? Do you have outdated product? Do you have anything in your warehouse? Who do you know in the retail manufacturing space who I could connect with that might have overstock? So I just began cold calling. And just, cold calling trucking companies, cold calling vendors, designers, manufacturers. And that's how I ended up building my ongoing supply, was through my own resources and my own relationships that I built.
Okay, yeah, because that is always the problem for anything that is a business based on like either refurbish, recondition, and so on. Like, they will always sell very well, those products, because they're at a lower price and people can spot a good deal. But how do you keep the supply up? Sourcing is always the problem with any kind of refurbished type of business or like that. So, okay, there was the obvious first bottleneck. Say, okay, can they still provide you enough product? Especially because you said you scaled up to 13 franchise. I highly doubted that this model would scale in any way.
Right.
So you were able to source products then and sort of put it together. And what about all those other franchises to scale up operation with the same providers? Or you had to source even more so you could supply those 13 locations?
Yeah, so we combined our concept in 2008 and then we franchised in 2010. And the majority of our franchisees came after that. So we had time to build up relationships, scale. So we started really working. The majority of our product always came from the West Coast. And we would just work with, warehouses, manufacturers. We had really great relationships. People started referring us like, oh my goodness, I'm going to send my friend to you. She just started a brand. She has a bunch of overstock. I'll tell her to sell her stuff to you. So that relationship and the product supply grew as we grew. We really fixed that problem before we started franchising, fixed the problem of where we were going to get the inventory from.
Okay. And like in rough numbers, like how many suppliers did you have to line up to be able to do this? Because that can change big time the logistics problem. Let's say if you have just one supplier, then you're at the mercy of that supplier. It's a huge business risk. But if you have too many suppliers, it's a logistic nightmare as well.
Yeah. So we ended up, we had our own warehouse in Fargo. So we'd bring all of the inventory in, we'd repackage it and ship it out to our franchisees. By that time, I wasn't doing any of the buying anymore. So it's hard for me to remember, but I mean, at least a dozen really good, solid, ongoing relationships with designers where we always took their overstock or we worked with them. And then we were always looking for new opportunities, new brands that were up and coming, new opportunities for just one-off purchases, because we were a designer outlet and our customers loved a treasure hunt. So they were fine with coming into the store and knowing, I love this brand. I like this deal. I may not see it again, and that's okay. So that was also part of our business model. We'd buy out companies that were closing. We could buy out their inventory as they liquidated it. So we had a lot of ways to get inventory to source.
Okay, yeah, it sounds a bit like the Winner's store here in
Yes.
Canada. I
Like
don't know if
TJ
yeah, you
Maxx.
have that
TJ Maxx
US
was
too,
actually
right?
one of our biggest competitors when it came to purchasing overstocks. So while they were purchasing, so
Okay.
was I. Even though we're much smaller, that's who we were competing with. So that same type of idea.
Okay, so you go on a treasure hunt, and yeah, people like that say, "Hey, and maybe I found something cool, and it's worth going to that store." And then you know it will run out. It's a bit the same concept with like Zara and
Yes.
so on. They with their quick fashion, which has all kind of ethical and ecological major concerns, but the idea is that this is going to be on the shelves for 2 weeks, and it will
When it's
never
gone, it's
be
gone.
produced again after. So there's a bit of a feeling, oh, I need to buy this right now. So for the consumer. Okay, and that's interesting. Now, so you were getting all that stuff to your main, let's say, your main office, and then you would redistribute and repackage all that to the
Yes.
rest as a main hub. Did you ever explore like creating your own brand, or you were purely on the retailer model?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about private labeling, but really that's a whole nother business model. So just wanting to really be careful in the stages of growth. I think a lot of times small businesses, there's a lot of opportunities for us. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. So it was something we explored and talked about a lot, but we were able to just fill our supply chain with the vendors that we had. So, we really didn't see the need, even though it was an interesting idea for us.
Okay. Okay. And let's say with that startup phase of your business, is there anything that, was a lesson learned or you do differently now if you would try it again?
Yeah, really, I would say on the franchise side of things is a lot of lessons learned. So when people think about franchising, if anyone in your audience is thinking about that, I would never discourage someone from the franchise model, but I think it's really important to be aware that franchising is very capital intensive. It's very expensive to franchise because you're suddenly supporting multiple locations and franchisees with teams, support teams, marketing support teams. So it's just very expensive. And I wasn't aware of that. I'm an entrepreneur. Everything's an opportunity. We'll figure it out, which is a blessing and a curse. So that was one thing, that I learned, just the capital intensive. And then I think the other big lesson for me was just really, what do I excel at as an entrepreneur and a founder? And where do I really want to spend my life and live my time, live my life and spend my time? When you become a franchisor, you no longer do the roles most often that made you really successful as a founder. So when I was a founder and I was in the details of my business and I could buy and pivot quickly and do all of those pieces, that I was really good at, when I changed roles and became a franchisor, now suddenly it was very regulatory, it was very operational. The pieces of business that I didn't necessarily love or excel at. And so understanding that in the franchise model is really important. Or I think anytime you scale, like when you scale your business, you might have an amazing business concept that could do really well, 2, 3, 4, 10 locations. But what role is that going to place you in? And are you okay with that as a founder? Suddenly you're overseeing a team of multiple people or a lot of operational heavy pieces of the business where before you thrive because you were hands-on and you were with customers. I think just being aware of that. And I didn't understand that I needed to be aware of that. So that would be something that was a big lesson learned as well.
It is something I've lived it too in a different context, of course, because we're a service business. But it's insane. Like at first, when you start the business, you deliver yourself, you manage your customer relationship yourself, you manage the project yourself. And then as you grow, you start hiring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 managers, project managers, and so on. And then you're managing true people who are then managing the product and the service and the delivery. And it creates that structure and it puts you in a completely different
Yes.
role. It's like, hey, I could just jump in and fix that. I'll make that work. But then no, I have to build a leader who can take care of that without me being involved.
Yes.
Very different role and style. I'm like a coach of the company in some way. Yeah, it's very different. And you talk about the financing. So I'm kind of curious, how did you structure that since you say it's capital intensive? Did you ask them to put all the capital and majority of it, or did you go with investors? How did you?
Yeah, so we never had investors. It was 100% owned by my husband and myself. He was an absent owner, so he had, his own job, his own career, but we owned it without investors. In franchising, they pay a franchise fee and ongoing royalty, and that can support a lot. I mean, it's, that royalty, which sometimes franchisees, when I talk to franchisees around the country, oh my goodness, well, I have to pay this 6% or this 8%, and I don't really know why. Well, part of that is going to the support team because you have a marketing team on the back end. You have, discounted rates at buying. There's different reasons for that, that royalty. The franchise fee, that gets eaten up very quickly. So there was a bit of capital that was injected, but, the majority of capital we had to support and find that on our own. So that we could have the team, we could have the warehouse, we could be sending out buyers, and support team for marketing, going out to our franchise stores and helping train their teams, or providing training materials, things like that. So, so a lot of it on when you franchise, the franchisor is responsible for the bulk of that revenue that you need.
Okay, so you did not have, let's say, a requirement like to become a franchisee, you need to like buy in for 100K or something.
That would be like the franchise fee. So our franchise fee was 30,000, which is pretty typical. Okay. Yep, and then an ongoing royalty of 6%.
Okay, totally makes sense. As long as it allows you actually to scale and so on, it's cool, and it does because you went up to 13 locations. And like, what made you stop at 13 locations? How do you monitor, let's say, the profitability of each of those locations? And somebody who bought in, let's say he paid at 30K, maybe his location is not profitable. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about the franchise model. They are independent business owners. So as a franchisee, you're basically buying the right to use the brand and to have ongoing support. If you have inventory, if you're inventory-based business, a lot of franchisors will supply that inventory in some way. I know that there's some retail franchisors that, are stricter with the products that you can put in your store. Some are a little bit looser. Everyone has a little bit different model. But as a franchisee, you're responsible, just like you would be for any business, for the profitability of your store, for running your store at a profit, for hiring and firing your team, for negotiating your own rent, all of those things as a franchisee. So we, as a franchisor, provided support. I'm not a franchisor anymore. And then the franchisees are responsible to make sure that their business is running in a way that they want their business to run. Franchising is federally regulated here in the United States. So there's a franchise disclosure document, and the franchisor has to be audited every year. So it's very tightly monitored to make sure, that as a franchisor, you're fulfilling all your obligations. And then the franchisee's business is their own LLC or incorporation, however they would set that up.
Okay. So it doesn't tax you too much because it's all autonomously run businesses. And you say there's a varying degree of flexibility what you allow to sell or not. Okay. So more flexibility, that's it, in a McDonald's or something like that, that everybody's exactly the same. Okay. And was there any kind of like human conflicts to manage with the other owners?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're working with people, you're managing personalities and expectations. So we, as a franchisor, franchisors never do anything with employees of the franchisees. Those are their own employers. They hire, fire, train. We would approve a franchisee, and then the team members that they have in their location are their own team members. But on the corporate side, we had our own team to manage and structure and train. There's a lot of moving pieces in franchising. And whenever I visit with someone about franchising, again, I would never discourage it. I think it's just really important to understand the business model. It's fairly complex. It is federally regulated in the United States. I don't know about other countries, but just to be aware of those things, I think is really important. As best you can, go in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, because you say you would not discourage anybody, but I hear a little bit like, okay, would you do it again? Going with the franchise approach if you were starting over?
I would not.
I
think I don't regret what I did because it made sense in that moment. In that moment of time, I learned a lot. I was very involved in the International Franchise Association. It was really interesting meeting our franchisees. I loved building the business. I loved my business model. I wouldn't do it again, but there's a lot of things we wouldn't do again. Would we run that race that we signed up for again? Would we buy that outfit? Would we eat at that restaurant? It doesn't mean that we didn't enjoy the process, but there's other options that might fit us better at this time. And for me, I love what I'm doing now. I love the independence. I love being in a service-based business now, and just helping counsel other. I feel like in this season of life, I am where I'm supposed to be. And so I don't want to go back to a place where I'm really cumbered down by so many of the people issues and, some of those human resources and team building and scaling. There's a lot of good that comes with that, but there's a lot of stress that comes with it as well.
For sure, especially when you're going with brick and mortar, real physical location, lots of staff. Like, yes, you're a product business, but you still have so much staff that the human aspect is major. Unlike, for example, an e-commerce store, that you can be way more scalable as truly a product business with maybe just a few support agents. And then maybe you have a 3PL, a third-party logistic partner there that will do the shipping and handling of all your orders, like you have with Amazon Prime or Amazon Fulfilled by Amazon, competitor of that, basically, that's independent of Amazon. So it's very, very different. Still very human aspect. And from your experience, let's say if you wanted to scale that, let's pretend it would have interested you. What would be like the 1, 2, 3 bottlenecks that would prevent it from going to, say, 100 franchises?
I think just having the right people is really important. So when you start a franchise, or if you start any business, what you can afford and who you need, the skill level that you can, and the talent that you could hire or afford is very different as a startup most often than it will be when you're a larger business. So your people change and what they can do for the business will change. So that can become a bottleneck. I've seen it with lots of companies that are scaling. The people that start out with you in business may not be the right people for you as you grow. And that's something really interesting. I think another thing would be marketing. The way that you market your business when you are new and a startup is very different than how you would market it, or you can market it or should market it as you scale and grow. Of course, you have different resources. So we do a lot of guerrilla marketing, boots on the ground, door knocking, all of those things, because we have more time than money when we're starting. And then as you scale, you end up most often with more money than time. And so how you would, play your hand at marketing might be a bottleneck if you aren't willing to observe, change, and grow with that piece of it. And then the third piece, I think, some inventory, just making sure, you mentioned this earlier, that you aren't solely reliant. I was just talking to a client, and her main vendor is not someone that she would really enjoy doing a lot of business with, but that vendor brings her a lot of sales. And I said, we're getting to a place where I think you need to look at that, because you don't want to be solely reliant, for a huge portion of your sales on a vendor that you don't really like. The business philosophy is very different, can pull the plug at any minute. What's going to happen when that vendor changes their mind and decides to leave? And you have so much of your sales revenue wrapped up in what they supply. So I think that's another piece too. As we grow and scale, we need to continue to look at those vendor relationships and make sure that we're not bottlenecking ourselves or getting to a place where we're so reliant on someone that can really, dictate the growth of our business.
Absolutely. Both on the product side and the service side, you never want to not have the luxury of being able to fire a client or a supplier if they violate your values, there's a lack of respect, or they don't come up with the right level of quality in terms. So you may take a little hit there on the cash, but you should be able to always be able to take it. Otherwise, it is somewhere to put really at the top of the priority list there to fix. And we've seen that, let's say, with the very sad war in Ukraine right now. But you've seen some company, like, for example, the BP company, British Petroleum. Petroleum companies will typically have bad reputation, and you can question their ethics and all that. But they move extremely fast. We're like the first one, like, out of Russia, and they said like 25 billion. Screw that, So it's like wow, okay, that's a very strong move, most likely value based. We don't know the whole story, and we'll never know. Maybe they would have lost that share anyway from the conflict or something. But like, this is impressive. It's like, okay, no, money is not the deciding factor. There's a value question, and we are able to act on our value and act swiftly and decisively and take the $25 billion loss. Like, wow,
Yes.
okay, that's impressive.
Yes.
You know, so you want to have that same ability with any clients and any supplier as well. So there's that fine act of balancing the suppliers list and not having a too crazy bottleneck on the the operation side of things, because it's easy also with product-based business to have a minimum order when you're a retailer with a lot of your distributors, and then you receive a small order, especially for an e-commerce store, and you receive like that $50 order, but you have a $500 minimum because, well, either badly negotiated or you just don't have volume or whatever with that distributor, and then your net negative cash flow is $450 and you receive a $50 order, and then you're stuck with stuff that you just hope you'll sell that inventory later. And this is actually not helping you scale in any way. It's like super negative,
Right.
because each time you get an order in, you create yourself a negative cash flow because of having too many suppliers for the volume and not having like enough select product of good sellers and so on. So it's something really important to think about.
Yes.
Okay, so just as a shotgun question, is there anything else you'd like to share from your experience in the franchise world?
I think we covered it. Yeah, I mean, I learned a
Okay.
lot. It's very interesting. There's a lot of emerging franchisors. So, that's because we look at the McDonald's, we look at the Arby's, we look at the really successful franchise businesses. Um, but just remembering that an emerging franchise is, again, capital intensive, time intensive, and you just really need to understand what you're going to. There's a lot of resources though. So the International Franchise Association, I know there was a lot of Canadian members in that as well. Really great resource. So just with anything, do your homework, ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So let's move on to the next topic. So now you're pretty much a business coach here for product-based businesses. So let's talk a bit about that. Like, what are some of the key areas that you like to work the most on improving, or that you see the most often that needs improvement, maybe on different sizes of business, maybe the small business, maybe the medium business, like 25 million and up. Like, talk about that.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter if you're very small, starting out, been in business for a while. I see a recurring theme, and that is not understanding your metrics, your numbers, your key performance indicators. So when I visit with a client for the first time, a lot of times I'll talk to someone and, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I have no time. They feel like all of these superficial problems are the actual root, and we dig right in and say, actually, your main problem is that we don't know your numbers well. Like, you're making decisions off of gut, off of reaction, off of feeling instead of off of data. So we just dig right into understanding the numbers. You don't have to be an accountant, you don't have to be a bookkeeper to know and understand the numbers that are important to your business.
Totally agreed. You need both. To me, both have a veto right. The gut feeling and the data. You can both say no to something, but you
Yes.
need both. Otherwise, some have surprisingly good approximation there. I can think of some businesses in the e-commerce world who scaled up really quickly by acquiring customers almost at cost and building a good lifetime value pipeline of then making money on order number 2 and number 3. But when you do this, you really need good data number so that it's actually scalable and you're sure you're making
Right.
money with order 2 and 3 in a global way with the cohort of customers acquired, let's say, first quarter, second quarter, or for the year and then the next year and so on. So the data is critical for those kind of e-commerce strategy, the very competitive landscape that we have.
Yes.
People try less and less to make money on the first order. They do. Of course, they would love that as much as possible. And if you can, great. But there's more and more a shift towards especially more established e-commerce merchants. Like, okay, let's make order number 2 and 3 the profitable one, and then just acquire at cost so we can scale.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more difficult for the newcomers coming in, and they don't have that whole pipeline of lifetime customer value yet, and they need to compete with those bidding way harder on the advertising to acquire a customer. It's like, how do they make money? Well, they don't, at least not on the first order. They do it on the second order. So anyway, that's an interesting point.
Yes.
Okay. What else do you have in mind after the data, knowing the data?
I think it just all really boils down to the data and then knowing how to use it, because you might know how to pull it or find it, but what do you do with that information? And then being able to really break down your data into very granular pieces. So, as an example, setting sales goals. A lot of small businesses don't set sales goals or don't know how to set sales goals or don't want to set them, but we can get them to a place of like, okay, it's important to set your sales goal. Now you have, let's say, a monthly goal. How do you break that down into granular pieces so you can accomplish it, so you can share it with your team so they understand where you're coming from and how they should accomplish meeting that goal? I think that's a really important skill to learn as well. Knowing what to do with the data and knowing how to break it down.
Yeah, because especially with lots of data, then you need to turn that data into insights.
Yes.
And so you can actually do something like what does that data mean? And of course, following through, which is always something challenging when we're talking human resources and managing people. It's like, okay, we have a bunch of to-dos. Did you follow through? Did you do it in a reliable way? And by the way, we like a lot EOS for small businesses, like under 250 employees. Very good system. Entrepreneurship operating system, EOS. You can check this out. It's a really good framework on how to operate a business, and you can tie that in with other frameworks like Profit First, which maybe you can talk to us a bit about later. So yeah, good point. I like those.
Yes.
Okay. So what would be the next point? Now we have our data. Now we have insights. And we follow through. We have a sales goal. We have an action plan on trying to achieve that sales goal. Is there other missing parts in the big picture?
I think challenging yourself to continue to be curious. I was just visiting with my mastermind clients about this concept of curiosity. So, as entrepreneurs, when we start, we're very curious. How is my product going to work? Where am I going to find customers? How do I fit? How should I market? But as we grow, we can lose that curiosity, the ability to ask why, to look critically at our decisions and dig deep into finding answers for, problems that we have to solve, or for being able to look at the horizon, what might be coming down the pipeline, especially when we're making money. I always say cash hides a lot of things. So when you're making money and you're doing really well, cash can hide a lot of mistakes and upcoming issues. And so remaining curious, I think, is a really important skill that entrepreneurs and small business owners need to continue to hone in their journey.
Okay. Pretty good. I'm kind of curious to just bring us again out of just for fun about the startup time of your business there in acquiring customers, because you talked about acquiring customers and it is always stressful. Let's say somebody's starting, either it's totally new business, or even if you already have a successful business offline and then you start an online business, the portion of acquiring customers and traffic and volume and scaling online is also stressful. So yes, you can think of Google Ads. Okay, let's hope that works, because almost every successful online store has a successful ad campaign also going on. But what if that ad campaign is not that profitable, and then you need to look at other ways of scaling? Then newcomers can be scared of that customer acquisition journey. So I'm curious to talk about this with you. Like, how did you acquire customer? How did you do your marketing, even the guerrilla marketing stuff? Like, how did you push the business in the startup?
I think a lot of it is relationship driven. So thinking about building relationships and connecting with your customers, listening to your customers, doing the hard things, going the old fashioned route. I talk to my clients about this. That old fashioned route in retail where you actually had people's names and phone numbers in your book. And when you got a new delivery, you called them and said, "Hey, I think you'd be interested in this product." There's ways we can modernize that, but I think we need to go back to the roots of that good old fashioned customer service and building relationships. That goes a long way to building, because our tendency now is just fast. We want everything to happen fast and we want to pay for it. So what can I pay for marketing? What's the newest, greatest marketing? Like you said, Google ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Pinterest, like what can I throw money at to get people? But if we really want to build a strong, sustainable business, we need to add the element of customer relations, customer service into that as well. Because that's what's going to, that old fashioned word of mouth is really what's going to grow a really good, solid foundation for us.
Okay. So you were saying you were doing like solicitation of past clients, like calling them up, say, hey, there's that new collection that just arrived or something?
Yeah.
Like
So,
that?
I mean, when I started my, my boutique workshop business or the subscription box, I literally went onto Instagram and looked for boutique owners and DM'd them. Hi, this is Ciara. This is what I'm offering. Would you be interested? Ask people and do it the old fashioned way. Yes, a lot of people don't respond. Yes, you may get some negative answers, but I've gotten amazing clients that I found by just asking if they would be interested. Can I send you a sample? Would you be interested in a free class? It takes time, but again, most often at the beginning of our journey, we have more time than money. And it's really good. It's a good skill to learn and hone in on. And, a lot of times when clients are finding themselves kind of in the doldrums, I'll say, give this to a team. Go back to the drawing board. Have your team DM or call 100 people a day or 10 people a day, set those metrics up and accomplish those too. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for business.
Okay. So when you're saying boutique owner, was that for your mod
No,
business,
this would be for my,
that they would resell?
for my
There was another
my
one,
most
right?
recent businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because that sounds like a totally different business model of having like other business owners
Right.
reselling your product.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And also, you talk about profit first, and I'm kind of really interested by that. We use it here. Would you like to talk a bit about it?
Yeah. So profit first, really interesting. I think it's become, for a while, it became kind of a buzzword, right? Everyone thought, oh my goodness, if I just do profit first, I'll finally grow, I'll have money. And it's not a magic pill, but it's an amazing cash management system. So it's just another way, it's another layer that you can add into your business to give you discipline to focus on the right things. So the main premise behind Profit First is if we have a big plate of anything in front of us, we're going to consume it. If we have a big plate of spaghetti, we're going to eat it all. If we have a big plate of cake, we're going to eat it all. So if we want to eat less, we need a smaller plate. And that follows through with everything in life. The more we have in front of us, the more we'll consume. So why would you not apply that to the way you manage your cash? If you allow all of your cash to dump into one main account and it's all in front of you, you're going to consume it. You're going to buy marketing. You're going to spend frivolously. You're going to hire everyone you can. You're going to way overspend on inventory. If we can instead create many small plates and each of them have a purpose, in other words, many small bank accounts, one has a purpose for paying your taxes, one has a purpose for paying you, one has a purpose for OPEX and so forth and so on, then the cash that's in that account is what's going to be consumed for that activity. So Profit First, it's not an accounting system. It's just a cash management system. It's a way for entrepreneurs to really focus their mind on the right parts of cash management in their business.
Totally agree. And it's so simple in a way. Like I do it about twice a month, just an Excel export of the bank statement and then just what's the total in.
Yep.
And then you just split that into a few accounts and here's the tax amount. So it's put aside. We never touch it. There's a profit amount. We don't touch it. And then whatever's left, that's what we can reinvest.
Yes.
And it's awesome. Like it's so simple. We can have a pushback from accountants saying, "Oh, it changes nothing." Like that, you spend first. What's going to be left is the profit. That you put the profit first, and then it changes nothing. You just flip the equation. That's a mathematical way of thinking. It doesn't reflect reality. Like you said, you have more cake than eat more. So when you do take the time, it's like, okay, what's the total? Just split that into a few accounts and done. It's not long. It does secure that cash aside. It's all the same bank, just seeing all the accounts, but it's separate to them and it gives you clear budgets without having, even though our accounting is done to the day or sometime yesterday, like we're almost up to the day for how up to date our accounting is, but still it's better to have that approach than relying on, oh, there's that amount, but then there's this much for taxes, this much for that, this much for that, and then go look your QuickBook, and then you know how much you can reinvest.
It refocuses.
So,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. Strongly recommended. Very simple technique. Very good for profitability. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that you have in mind from your client's experience, either with Profit First or perhaps with growing their customers list? Maybe it's on social media or maybe some other, like, I'm very interested by that fashion apparel experience that you have there. If there's anything else that you have in mind about growing that company, I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, I think on the Profit First side, so like you mentioned, I'm Profit First certified, and my main focus is to help inventory based businesses. Profit First can be very confusing when you read the book. If you just read the book and you hear about these mats and subs, and what does that mean for me? I have inventory. So with my clients, I really focus on setting up an inventory account as well and managing your inventory spend with Profit First also. So I think that's something that's important for your listeners. If they have inventory, which I know they all do, they're product based, and you want to follow the Profit First model, to think about how inventory also plays into the movement of money or cash in your business. Yeah. And then I think just on the apparel side, of the business, it's just really important to understand who your customer truly is. So as we were building, our retail women's apparel business, really understanding the avatar of our customer, who she was, where she hangs out, what are her pain points, I always encourage my clients to think about what problem you're solving, not just what product are you selling, because it's very easy for customers to just think like, I'm selling XYZ, but really you're solving a problem, you're providing a solution. So coming from that standpoint.
Yep. Very good point. And to talk about another accounting system there, it's called throughput accounting. And I don't want to confuse things because you can still do Profit First and you can still do throughput accounting as well in addition to the classic accounting. But that's something that is highly recommended for anyone who has inventory, because classic accounting has a few false assumptions. I'm not going to get into that for the inventory business. Sometimes inventory can be seen as an asset or a good thing or whatever. Well, actually, it's a liability. It may lose value, may be broken, may be damaged. It's cash that's sitting there. It's not being invested. So throughput accounting is really interesting in the sense that it's more like how much volume do you move, more like optimizing the cash and profitability and trying to reduce inventory to the maximum. It's very very logical. There's a book called The Goal. It's written by I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Elihu Goldratt, very famous business book. Some people almost made it their religion. Highly, highly recommended. Throughput accounting, you might check that out. Complementary to Profit First. Profit First is the way easier to apply first, let's say. But then the next step to graduate after that would be to use throughput accounting into classic accounting to scale up a business. Very interesting. So that's it. Anything else you'd like to share maybe on the growth of the company, perhaps for your clients? Anything interesting you've seen recently for customer acquisition or something like that?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean, other than what we've chatted about, just, really focusing on the numbers. I think really understanding your business model and being willing to listen to the customer feedback to pivot and change the direction when needed. We've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years with COVID and everything, that's happened with business. People want to go, all online, and then they want to be brick and mortar again. And now the consumer wants to be online. And now, the consumer is very fickle. And so just being really in tune to what they actually want and how to solve a problem before it arises, I think is really important for entrepreneurs to be in tune to that.
And we talked about product sourcing for your form of business at first. And what I heard is mostly like, well, just pick up the phone book more or less and just cold call them until you find something. Do you have any other tips around, let's say, sourcing products to build a product-based company?
I'm very relationship focused. So it's all about the relationship and the ask. I mean, that's my philosophy. So you cold call, you do the hard work, you pound the pavement, and then you build relationships. Because when you do that with your customers or you do it with your vendors, they're going to recommend other customers. They're going to recommend other vendors. And that's how we built our business. Being open, having conversations, asking, and then asking, hey, we love working with you. Do you have anyone that you could recommend? Do you know of any other manufacturers here in this city that would be interested in talking to me? So for me, it's all about relationships. I think we rely as a society, even our entrepreneurs, on just Googling everything, just looking for everything, instead of really like just talking to people and asking, like putting in that time to ask. And there's a lot of strength in relationship building. So I think that's a really important piece, even in product procurement.
Cool. Awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to share for today's episode for businesses or with product-based business?
I think just on that relationship theme from a developmental standpoint as well, continue to surround yourself with really wise people. Always have people that are 2 steps ahead of you in your sphere, 2 steps behind you. We learn a lot by teaching too. And so if you have that person behind you, that's, entrepreneur that's coming up behind you and you're helping them, you're going to learn through that help. Same thing with, following an entrepreneur that's been there, done that, asking questions, building relationships, building your circle, making the deposits into the relationship community that you have, so that when you need help and support, you have a community around you. I think more than ever, that's so important.
Okay. And if people want to get in touch with you, Ciara, what's the best way?
I think just to find me at theboutiqueworkshop.com. You can connect with me there, Instagram, Facebook, all the links are there, email. So just head on over to theboutiqueworkshop.com and I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today, Ciara.
Thank you for having me.